Good morning, Divonauts, and welcome again to Cronista de Indias, the YouTube channel dedicated to Latin American studies by Professor Andrea Lorena Fernandez from Pace University. Follow me on Instagram for more cultural content throughout the week. You might have noticed last week I did not upload a video, and it's because on Tuesday, July 24th, 2018, at 11 a.m. in the morning, I became a doctor. Yay! I defended my doctoral dissertation with a committee of three professors, Doctors Raquel Chan Rodriguez, Juan Mercado, and Carlos Riobo, all from the CUNY system in New York City. So as of now, you get to root for me because I'm going on the job hunt for the fall of 2019, hopefully looking for tenure track jobs or fellowships. So root for me because it's a new chapter in my life and I don't know what I'm doing. In the last episode of Cronista de Indias, episode 16, titled Flora Tristán, Tapada Limeña, Tourism, Ethnography, and Europhilia, 1838, we discussed the tapada limeña and how this garment in Lima, which is exclusive to the city of Lima during the 19th century, enabled women to have public agency outside of the home, but in exchange they became eroticized as objects of exotism and as proof that European women, as opposed to their South American counterparts, are more civilized. So take a look at the previous episode to see social Darwinism at work. The present episode, Season 1, Episode 17, is titled Josefa Acevedo Gómez, the Positivist Mother, House and Housewife. Order and Cleanliness is her motto from 1848. In this episode, we studied the scientification of women's domestic duties and maternity at the national level as a response to the laxity in gender norms during the revolutionary period of 1800 to 1830. And it's revolution plus industrialization of Latin American urban centers, which is 1830 to 1880. So when you combine the two of them, you get somebody like Josefa Acevedo Gómez. So we're going to ask number one, who is Josefa? No, her writing style consists of two components. One, here's a positivist, liberal, domestic advice that you may take, ladies. Two, you're a horrible human being, half mother, feral beast, and moral failure if you don't listen. So that is who Josefa Acevedo Gómez is as a writer. Number two, we're going to review positivism and how it assisted in instructing women on scientific homemaking while reinforcing their intellectual inferiority. Three, we're going to talk about women's appropriation of classical liberalism's jargon to educate and an interpretation of social reality. We're going to study specifically the phenomenon of pawn shops. If you like that show on the Hitler channel, go ahead and check out Pawn Shop. But we're going to do the 19th century Latin America. So back to Josefa. She is the author of A Treatise on Domestic Economy for the Use of Mothers and Housewives. Wow, that title. It sounds like I should do it in a fake English accent that I can't master. So, Josefa is from the upper middle class family in Santa Fe de Bogota in Colombia. She's involved in the independence movement as a young woman and might have even met La Pola personally. She negotiated with patriarchy in terms of the separate spheres and remained in the public eye with advice books for mothers and couples. So, while her sisters, well, in her writing, she recommends that her sisters return to the home, she herself found a niche place in which she didn't have to operate from the home in the first place. Two, Europhilia. She is obsessed with being European. You have to be more European than the Europeans to prove your status in Latin America. And she's part of this group of bourgeois women with aristocratic aspirations. So they may emphasize the white ancestors at the expense of the other races. For example, she says, never throw hats, gloves, parasols on chairs and keep it in a fixed place. So this obsession with organization. She is preoccupied with widowhood and prostitution. Because the 19th century in Latin America was so violent and it consisted of caudillos and cycles of civil wars and military juntas and back and forth, women, one-third of women in urban centers were heads of household. So uh, widowhood and prostitution came hand in hand without education, and Josefa Acevedo Gómez anticipates that if you give women at least a domestic education, that they won't fall into prostitution. We know that this is not that's not a logical conclusion necessarily. So hoarding jewelry is convertible equity for women in the 19th century. Maintaining the appearance of wealth meant clothing, sewing, mace, an unofficial economy, and these practices help you tame young girls. So sewing as a way to make little girls behave. And when you see a man with a badly sewn shirt, you take pity on him because you think that he's lacking in family. So the women as keeping up appearances for the rest of the family, not just themselves. And last but not least, she emphasizes the importance of men's garments over women's in showing the family honor. So the men had to be better dressed, even if the women could spare a gown. And with girls' education, you have to encourage them to take pleasure in household duty, otherwise they won't do it. Two, know enough arithmetic to keep servants from robbing the house. Those are the two important things that little girls should know, according to Josefa Acevedo Gómez. So this already sounds pretty limiting. It doesn't sound like Josefa is on our girls' side. However, this is first wave feminism. It is embryonic. We can't really judge it by our standards. So the fact that she's publishing for women in the first place is already a step forward. So what are the characteristics of positivism? Empiricism, progress equals order, science solves all of life's problems, laissez-faire is tied to economic liberalism, there is anti-clericalism, naturalism, and in painting, realism. So here's a quote from Josefa Acevedo Gómez in the textbook Women and Gender in Modern Latin America. It says, quote, women who do not want to keep their own accounts or do not know how to, and rather have someone else take charge of this duty, are to be preferred to those who feign toughness and watchful eye, and in doing so allow their servants to rob their fathers and husbands, encouraging their disloyalty with their false vigilance. Women's lack of scientific knowledge should not come as a surprise. Yuck. Hold on, pause. Women's lack of scientific knowledge should not. That one always pisses me off like it's new. Okay. Women's lack of scientific knowledge should not come as a surprise, and their limited grasp of the fine arts is quite common and does not engender dishonor or lead necessarily to privation. However, to be completely ignorant of the duties one has to perform as a woman, or how to run a household, the chores involved, and the detailed accounts which must be kept, astonishes, appalls, and engenders feelings of contempt in those who witness it. And any woman who finds herself in this position should feel ashamed and bitter. So, ladies, if you don't do enough math and your house gets robbed, it's all on you. All right, you should be ashamed and bitter. So here's what I mean by here's a maxim that you should follow, and here's some horrible human failure of your own if you don't follow Josefa's advice. So she doesn't really give you a lot of wiggle room. With this quote, actually, Latinas might tell you their mother's most common argument for making them do housework as little girls, whereas their brothers don't actually get to do anything. I used to get, cuando seas grande y tengas un tren de servicio, igual tendrás que saber hacerlo todo para que no te jodan. So, how do we translate this? When you grow up, even if you have a service squad, you'll have to know how to do everything yourself so they don't screw you over. So, okay, maybe this might be anecdotal, but it's a great reason to leave a comment below. So tell me if your Latina mother or if your mother from another culture led with this argument to make you do housework. Because frankly, it's a shitty argument because housework sucks. Women's responsibility in both cases seem unattainable. Household order equals family progress, that is part of positivism. You are solely responsible for the family's honor, which is attached to failing to manage household resources. You have to avoid pretense and false vigilance. There's a little bit of empiricism in keeping a watchful eye on your servants. And while homemaking has always included math, now it is attached to scientific knowledge women barely grasp, according to Josefa herself. But if you take a look at history, we've always been managing households, so it's not like scientific or mathematic knowledge in the university sense has been of any assistance or has been removed at all. Last but not least, you should feel bitter and ashamed if the family is scammed. This is a form of twisted naturalism where you take a look at social vices and realism and put them on paper. So the whole quote is a treatise on positivist homemaking. Let's go to the next section, section 2, appropriation of economic liberalism's jargon. This refers to laissez-faire, that economic model that emerged in the Industrial Revolution, now happening as if on steroids all over Latin America 50 years after independence. So if you want to take a closer look, you need to check out Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1776 for that. Josefa Acevedo Gómez's book on modeling female behavior is actually titled A Domestic Economy. She is thinking of the wealth of nations and trying to apply it in the home, and thus furthering her own fame as a writer by piggybacking on Adam Smith. This is another form of Europhilia. Seeing housework as an economy implies that there's a manager who administers resources and times, there's codification of domestic sphere into rational orderliness, and this brings us back to the concept of Republican motherhood. What is the role of women within the newly independent republics? And this was a scientific experiment on the continental level. The question everybody was asking was, can we, after the laxity in gender norms during the revolutionary era, scientifically command women back into their place? And it seems like the subconscious message was, no, you can't do that. Making them house manager is putting a band-aid on a leaky pipe. Women have already been outside, they've already been public agents like Manuela Sáenz, they ain't going back. So nice dreams, positivism and social Darwinism, you were a band-aid solution. The oddity here is that it is perpetrated by a female writer for the betterment of her sisters. So as feminists today, it's very unlikely a text like this would fly, but in the 19th century, we're like, yay, you girl, you're on our side, you're trying to educate us, make our life better, so and so. So they appreciated it. And there is it is reflective of the political climate of civil wars and caudillismo, where the men died and women headed a third of the households from 1820 to 1870. So here is a list of examples from the text that sound a lot like shit Latinas moms say at you, not with you. So we're going to quote and comment. So quote number 1, we must take great care to be very meticulous to make sure our clothes stay in good condition, as without them one cannot live life to the full. Rich people must ensure they look after their luxury gowns in the same way as their precious jewels, and for the reasons already mentioned. An expensive gown, just like any valuable jewel, represents a source of capital on which we can fall back on in days of trouble. Gowns and jewelry, as you can see in this quote, are readily convertible into liquid cash in the event of an emergency. It might be the reason why women in the 19th century and even today might still prefer jewelry as gifts, because it is insurance against the husband's abandonment or death. So it's not superficial materialism to want these things. Here's an anecdotal. When my family came to the United States, the airplane tickets were purchased with everybody's baptismal crosses. So today, in the present, it's still jewelry is still seen as family heirlooms, but ready-made cash as well for emergencies. So we migrated with that cash from Venezuela. Quote number 2. It is good and useful for girls to learn how to carefully mend a pair of stockings, and how to darn skillfully, and how to attach a patch neatly. In other words, to know how to present an old garment mended in such a way that nobody notices the first sight that is condition it is in. So this concept in Latin America turns into el que dirán in colloquial speak, or what will people say if they knew you were actually broke. So you have to keep up appearances. Here's another example. Other Latinas might have examples as well. My grandmother used to make me dust my shoes obsessively, so people would not think that we lived in the Caracas slums or barrios, which technically were right across the damn street on Avenida Intercomunal del Valle. So for this social divide to exist, my shoes, according to my grandmother, needed to look new, meaning that you climbed no hill to get home, but instead took a nice middle-class elevator. So it still is a factor. 3. A girl who mends her own dresses does not frisk about wildly, neither does she play with the dog, play mischievously with fire, climb trees, nor ever forget the restraint and composure with which young ladies must behave. So, homemaking and household duties as a girl's tranquilizer to keep her from being that tween girl that climbs on trees and is perfectly happy, that is seen as negatively. So, you dress them up in things that are rigid so they can't move and they're disencouraged from playing outdoors. Imagine this is the century of containing the female body. I know we imagine previous centuries as more. More sexist, but the 19th century with the social Darwinism and positivism really take it to a whole new level. They make it scientific. And it's the century of containing the female body. Remember, 1830s to 1870s, to 1920s is the age of the caudillos and the corsets. Caudillos and corsets in Latin America, that's where it goes. And the separate spheres, this idea that boys will be boys and they get to be pardoned if they're mischievous, whereas girls need to be poised and they are rewarded with homework or with housework, sewing. The last quote we're going to do is, when one sees a man wearing a badly sewn shirt, even more poorly, when one notices his collar is torn, his tie is hemmed, and his waistcoat has no buttons, well, he's really let himself go here. One feels sorry for him because he lives alone or because he is absent from family. How embarrassing it must be for many women who live with husbands, brothers, and sons who appear to be dressed in a worn and shabby state as those who do not have a woman to carefully look after their clothes, unquote. So I used to hear this one as a child, but instead of poorly sewn, it was camisa mal planchada or poorly ironed shirt. So my grandfather was the chief of the fire department in Bomberos de Caracas. And his uniform had to be pristine, like that, everybody worshipped that uniform, and because it was reflective of the women's ability to care for their men. So I was there putting buttons back on my grandfather's uniform. Oh, and starching the collar because they had to be stiff as a board. I don't know how he dealt with the beard and the the near shaving. um, so this brings us back to the concept of motherhood, which merges with positivism, liberalism, and Marianismo. Let's check out previous episodes of Marianismo, that's episode 4. And it amplifies the concept of family honor to include women's new roles as heads of households. So it is a negotiation of power in a changing political environment. You might have noticed that there's an obsession with cloth. All the 4 quotes that I read previously have to do with fabric and garments. So this brings us to this textbook right here, where we're going to read a section by Marie-Hélène Francois, Making Ends Meet, Keeping Up Appearances, Pawning in the Day-to-Day Life in Households of Mexico City. So that's our article. And while we are borrowing from our Mexican sisters to illuminate the Colombian sister, you know that this information you may transfer to your favorite country. So this one works in other countries as well. There are Josefas everywhere. So in the section titled Cloth, Silver, and Housekeeping After Mid-Century, it says, neighborhood pawnshops in the Monte de Piedad were steady and everyday resources for women in the city. As was true earlier, most goods pawned at mid-century either belonged to women or were associated with housekeeping. Female clothing, as well as feminine jewelry, were still pawned more often than their masculine counterparts. Women were also the clients, most often pawning housekeeping goods, such as bed and linen and table linen, silver spoons, cookware, and irons. This holds true for my experience as well. My baptismal cross was pawned before my brother's, so he got to keep his for a little longer. For some reason, his Catholicism was more valuable than mine. Ah, I love him, by the way. Okay. Housewives and the women heading a third of the city's household who left home to do the work of provisioning in the grocery stores and markets first found it necessary to drop in at pawn shops where they would secure coins to buy food for their families or clothes to dress their children. As Maria Robledo's pawning record and the data in 6 inventories from Cartagena workshop in 1860 suggests, pawning continued to be an everyday, even habitual practice with frequent visits of neighborhood women to the same pawnbroker. So we should know that although Latin America was industrializing, capital was not kept in banks. So if you needed a loan, you couldn't go to the bank, you needed to pawn something. Capital came from foreign investors and went straight into the hot little pockets of the oligarchy. It didn't trickle down like Adam Smith said would happen. Oh, duh. So In conclusion, episode 17 of Latin American Divas, Josefa Acevedo Gómez, Positivist Mother, Housewife, Order and Cleanliness is her motto, 1847. We, 1. Learn about Josefa Acevedo Gómez, a transitional figure between independence and industrialization, who brought into the positivist notion as applied to gender norms in her widely read essays. 2. Her appropriation of liberalism's vocabulary to rationalize household duties does little to further women's education beyond the home. This is characteristic of the early Republican backlash against women's agencies as heads of household, but it's also a negotiation. Lastly, we made a connection between sewing, cleanliness, pawnshops, and civil war. They are actually all interconnected for us. You can't take them apart. In the next episode, we visit Cuba. Oh my god, yay! Cuba! People are gonna be so excited over this. Episode 18 is gonna be for Gertrudis Gómez de Avellaneda. Yay! And we're going to analyze Sab, Romanticism's abolitionist novel from 1841, which, by the way, precedes anything written in the United States that was even remotely abolitionist. So, Cuba, go you. You did it first. Abolitionist novel. So, here's a quote from Sab. To dip your appetite. But it is not God, Teresa. It is men who have shaped my destiny. It is they who have clipped the wings with which God endowed my soul. They who have constructed a wall of misconceptions and prejudices between me and my destiny, which Providence has chosen for me. It is they who have rendered God useless. They who said, "Are you strong? Then be weak. Are you proud? Then be humble. Do you lust after great virtues? Well, employ your powerlessness in humiliation." They are the ones who should fear to appear before God, because they have a terrible explanation to give. 1841. So thank you once again for taking the time to learn more about Latin American women and Latin American history in general here at Cronista de Indias, where new episodes drop mostly every Friday. Please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode with the newly minted Doctora Andrea Lorena Fernandez. As always, a million thanks for viewing, sharing, and liking the episodes. Do epic shit. Just do epic shit.